The screeching of a white SUV over the pristine gravel of my grandfather's driveway was the first sign that Brenda was on another warpath. My grandfather, a man whose skin was etched with the maps of 1,000 stories and whose hands still smelled faintly of motor oil and peppermint, didn't even flinch as he sat on his porch. He just kept polishing an old silver coin, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the suburban sun was beginning to dip into a bruised purple hue. How could one woman have so much venom in a neighborhood meant for peace? Brenda marched up the lawn, her heels sinking into the turf she had spent months trying to find me for, her face a frantic shade of magenta. She wasn't just the president of the Homeowners Association, she was a self-appointed deity of the cul-de-sac. "You can't have that flag flying here, Silas," she shrieked, her voice cracking like dry wood. "It's a violation of Code 42B. And frankly, it's an eyesore that's tanking the property values of everyone who actually cares about this community." My grandfather finally looked up, letting out a long, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 30 years of service. The flag in question was a weathered, faded blue banner from his precinct, a relic of a life lived in the trenches of the city. He didn't say a word. He just went back to his coin, the rhythmic tink-tink-tink of metal on metal driving Brenda into a visible tremor of rage. The air grew thick with the smell of freshly cut grass and the bitter metallic tang of Brenda's perfume. "Do you think you're above the law just because you're old?" she demanded, her phone already out, thumb hovering over the dial pad. "I told you last week that the peeling paint on your shutters and that ridiculous flag had to go, or I'd be forced to take official action." My grandfather's silence was his shield, but I could see the slight tremor in his fingers. It wasn't fear. It was the restrained energy of a lion watching a house cat hiss. I stepped forward, my own blood boiling. "Brenda, it's a commemorative flag, and the shutters are being painted on Monday. Give it a rest." She whirled on me, her eyes narrowed into slits. "The grandson speaks. Maybe you should spend less time defending his laziness and more time looking for a job that doesn't involve wearing a hoodie in July." She didn't wait for a rebuttal. She pressed the button. "I'm calling it in, Tis," her voice dripping with a sickly sweet satisfaction. "We'll see how quiet you are when the real authorities show up to cite this dump." The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of a lawnmower and the chirping of crickets that didn't know a storm was brewing. My grandfather leaned back in his rocking chair, the wood creaking a slow, steady rhythm. He looked at me and winked, a tiny glint of mischief in his tired eyes. We waited. The neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. About 10 minutes later, the blue and red lights began to dance against the white picket fences of the street. 2 patrol cars pulled up, tires crunching softly on the asphalt. Brenda practically skipped to the curb, her face transformed into a mask of distressed civic duty. "Thank goodness you're here," she cried, waving her arms as 2 tall, broad-shouldered men stepped out of the lead car. "This resident is in gross violation of community standards. He's being hostile, and he's flying unauthorized signage that's causing a public nuisance." She pointed a manicured finger at my grandfather like he was a common criminal. The officers, looking weary from a long shift, started walking up the driveway. One was a younger man with a buzz cut, the other an older veteran with silvering temples and a look of permanent skepticism. They kept their eyes on the porch, their hands resting habitually near their belts. As they got closer, the older officer stopped dead in his tracks. His jaw didn't just drop, it practically hit the pavement. The younger officer followed his gaze, his posture shifting instantly from authoritative to rigid. Brenda was still rambling, her voice a high-pitched drone. And he refuses to acknowledge the fines. He just sits there like he's, Officer Miller? Are you listening? The older officer didn't answer her. He took off his cap, his eyes widening in total disbelief. Commissioner? He whispered, his voice cracking with a mix of shock and profound respect. My grandfather stood up then, his back straight, the years of retirement falling away like a discarded cloak. He looked every bit the man who used to command a force of 5,000. Is that you? My grandfather asked, knowing smile playing on his lips. Last I saw you, you were a rookie crying over a scraped knee in the 3rd precinct. The officer laughed, a booming, genuine sound that cut through Brenda's confusion like a knife. Sir, it's been 12 years. What on earth are you doing out here in the sticks? The younger officer snapped into a crisp, sharp salute. His eyes filled with a kind of awe you only see in movies. Commissioner Vance. Sir, we studied your de-escalation tactics in the academy. It's an honor. Sir, Brenda's face went from magenta to a ghostly, sickly pale. Commissioner? She stammered, her voice small and shaky. What do you mean? Commissioner? Officer Miller turned to her, his expression hardening into a look of pure, unadulterated steel. This man is Silas Vance. His voice dropping an octave. He was the police commissioner for 2 decades. He's the reason this city has a lower crime rate. And he's the reason I'm still alive after a botched robbery in '09. And you called us. For a flag? Brenda tried to find her words, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The bylaws. The property values. It's about the aesthetic harmony of the Miller stepped into her personal space, his shadow looming over her. Mom, you called 911 to report a highly decorated veteran and a legendary public servant for flying his precinct flag on his own porch? Do you have any idea what constitutes filing a false police report or harassing a senior citizen? The air seemed to vibrate with the tension. Neighbors had started peeking out of their windows, some even stepping onto their lawns to witness the fall of the Queen. Brenda looked around, realizing for the first time that she was the villain in this story. But I was just trying to keep the neighborhood nice. She whimpered, her bravado crumbling into pathetic dust. My grandfather walked down the porch steps, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped in front of her, the silver coin still in his hand. Brenda, he said softly, his voice carrying further than her screams ever did. Power isn't about rules and fines. It's about how you treat people when you think they can't fight back. You thought I was just a lonely old man you could bully into submission. He turned to the officers, his eyes softening. Boys, I'm sorry she wasted your time. Why don't you come inside for some of my grandson's famous iced tea? I think we have some old case files to reminisce about. Miller grinned, glancing back at Brenda, who was now trembling. We'd love to, Commissioner. But first, I think we need to have a very long talk with this lady about the legal definitions of harassment and the consequences of abusing emergency services. He pulled out his ticket book, the very one Brenda had hoped would be used on us. As they led a sobbing, protesting Brenda toward the patrol car to issue a formal warning and a hefty fine for the false call, the neighborhood erupted. Mr. Henderson from across the street actually started clapping. The sound echoed through the trees, a rhythmic celebration of justice served. My grandfather put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and warm. The sun finally set, leaving a trail of gold across the sky. You see, so? He whispered. The truth has a funny way of showing up exactly when it's needed most. Don't ever let the small people make you feel small. As the police lights faded into the night, The blue flag fluttered in the breeze, looking more beautiful and defiant than it ever had before. It wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was a reminder that no matter how loud the bullies yell, integrity is a fortress that never falls. Would you like me to help you draft a follow-up scene where the HOA board meets to discuss Brenda's removal?